Welcome once again, fight fans. Sean O'Connell, Dan Hardy, DAZN MMA. Happy to be here talking to you about the sport we all love so much. We're a week plus removed now from the return of Jon Bones Jones. Most of us think he's the greatest of all time, but there are still boxes that need to be checked before we can definitively say that. And one of those boxes is going to be Jon Jones' next fight, already announced, coming up in July. Stipe Miocic, Jon Jones. Most people say Stipe, Dan Hardy, is the best heavyweight UFC fighter or mixed martial artist of all time. And now Jon Jones is trying to jump over that hurdle, really put an emphasis on the fact that he is the greatest of all time. The question becomes, is Stipe the one that stands in his way? Is Stipe the ones that can derail the renewed hype train of Jon Bones Jones?
I think it's a tough test for Stipe, to be honest. I think, especially given the fact that he's been out for a while now, and Jones just looks, he looks so dominant as a heavyweight against Cyril Gane. I feel like he's going to have a similar performance against the majority of people in the division. It's going to take someone, really outstanding to push Jon Jones out of the first round at this stage. And Miocic is an excellent fighter, but he does tend to hang on his back foot a little bit, which, it'll make the oblique kicks, the chasse kicks to the lead leg a bit less of a problem, but it's still going to be very difficult moving forward against Jones. And then Stipe's not really got a heavyweight reach either. He's got quite a short reach, so that's another thing he's going to have a disadvantage over. I feel like Jones is going to have the physiological advantages, both with reach and with speed, but I also think his wrestling is going to be problems for Stipe as well, because then Jones is going to be able to take the fight where he wants it. I think it's an interesting test for Jones, but I don't think it's anywhere near the kind of test that you would think someone like Francis Ngannou would be. Like, Ngannou's like a physiological problem, and that's really the person that's going to beat Jon Jones, someone that can punch him in the face and put him to sleep. And I don't know if Stipe's that guy.
Stipe is the likable heavyweight champion, right? The people's champion, the guy who never stepped away from his firefighter paramedic job, even while he was the baddest man on the planet, right? He is, in a lot of ways, sort of the antithesis of what Jon Jones represents in the sport. The unproblematic, wholesome champion, right? And I think there's going to be a lot of people rooting for Stipe because of that. But all the things that you just said remain true whether you like Jon Jones or not, right? He's longer, he's younger, he's faster, he's probably better, probably more well-rounded. Do I think Stipe is going to train his off and give Jon Jones a test? Absolutely. Do I think it's going to be a tougher win for Jon Jones than Cyril Gane was? Absolutely. Do I believe Stipe Miocic is going to beat Jon Jones? Probably not. And so it begs this question that we asked when we first talked about Jon Jones' return. Who is it? Who is out there? If it's not the next obvious contender, the greatest UFC heavyweight champion of all time, who is it? Dana White brought up Brock Lesnar. That's a fight that you just sell a pay-per-view. That has nothing to do with somebody beating Jon Jones. Brock Lesnar can't do it, right? Is there someone in the PFL? Is someone in Bellator? Is there someone in one championship? Is the guy who's right now unsigned as an MMA talent, Francis Ngannou, ever going to help us answer the question? Is he ever going to find a way back and fight Jon Jones, or is he moved on? They've said, yes, it's done. It's a done deal. It's not going to happen. But a lot changes over the years in the sport of mixed martial arts. So the floor is yours, Dan Hardy. Is there someone out there on planet Earth in a regulated mixed martial arts fight that can beat Jon Jones?
Well, obviously, the obvious one to talk about is Francis Ngannou, because he was the most recent UFC heavyweight champion, and I do feel like the fact that he holds so much power in his hands means that Jon Jones has to approach him very, very cautiously, which might force Jon Jones to be a different fighter. Like against Cyril, he kind of walked him down pretty quickly. He wasn't too concerned about what was coming back. And I feel like it would be the same against Stipe. I don't know who else in the division, aside from maybe Derek Lewis, that's got that kind of punching power. And I don't feel like Jones would give Lewis any respect because of his lack of ability to wrestle. So, I have to kind of start looking outside of the UFC. I mean, I think we've got some interesting fighters around the globe that are not signed to the UFC. The one that keeps coming to mind, and he made a comment the other day on his social media, which I thought was interesting. Anatoly Malikin, who's the light heavyweight champion at One Championship. I believe he's fighting Arjun Buller soon, so he may potentially be a champion in One. He's a short guy. He's what, 5'10", 5'11". He's a power puncher, leaps at his opponents to knock them out, but he's also got very good wrestling. And his observation of the UFC roster was, how can the best heavyweights be in the UFC when the number 2 can't wrestle, referring to Cyril Gane. So that's an interesting observation. Of course, he might not get the opportunity to prove himself against the UFC roster, but it's an interesting thought, because there are definitely people outside of the UFC. Ante Delija, you can't take away that guy's abilities, his finishing ability, his viciousness. The fact that he's got Cro Cop as his mentor is a huge strength. There are definitely fights outside the UFC for Jon Jones, but as far as the actual UFC roster, I kind of feel like he has it locked down. I feel like he's most likely going to beat Stipe fairly comfortably, and then they'll try and accelerate a champion up, someone like a Sergey Spivak, who has just not got the game, the depth of their game to compete with Jones. It's going to take an anomaly, someone like Francis Ngannou, who has scary, reckless punching power, or someone that's like a DC, like someone that's 5'10", that can punch and wrestle, like an Anatoly Malikin. They're interesting problems for Jon Jones. More interesting than some of the ones in the UFC roster, I think.
How old is Cain Velasquez right now? I know he's got some legal issues he's got to work out, but do we know how old Cain Velasquez is? If he's out, is he training? Is he in shape? Cain Velasquez, skill set wise, if there's another Cain out there, that's somebody with that endless gas tank for a heavyweight, that motor, that wrestling ability, good hands, maybe. But again, you're talking about Jon Jones here. You're talking about someone who continues to get better and has the physical tools that very few MMA fighters do. Jones likes to do this thing where he says, oh, yeah, I got bad genetics, because he's got those skinny legs. Jon Jones is the opposite of bad genetics. He's an anomaly. His 2 brothers played in the National Football League, okay? Those are genetics that don't grow on trees. The guy's an absolute freak of nature. So you have to be skilled and probably a freak of nature to beat him. And there's not that long of a list of those guys. Stipe, probably the whole MMA fan base is going to be rooting for you in some sense, but going to be a tough test.
Like, if that's the one thing that Jones has to deal with, is having skinny ankles, then I mean, even the T-Rex had little arms. You can't have everything your way. You know what I mean? It's like that's his cross to bear, and I think he's doing a good job with it. He's wrapped it around a few people's heads a few times, so they work quite well as striking weapons. I think Jones is not. We've not even seen a fraction of his game yet. As you know from following MMA for so long, heavyweights tend to peak a lot later in their career. Like, Jones might be before his heavyweight peak right now. He might not peak it as a heavyweight until 37, 38, 40. Then you start talking about Cain Velasquez. I think he's probably 42, 43 now. But I mean, I'd still watch that fight. Cain was an absolute beast. Sea-level Cain, even more so. My goodness, you can't stop that guy.
Jon Jones, last thing on Jon Jones. He talked about the tape on the toes, how he has to tape his toes. Is that the thing that, like, maybe a commission doesn't let Jon Jones tape his toes, and then he can't focus on anything but his untaped toes in a fight, and that's the thing that beats him? Is that the Achilles heel for Jon Jones? Achilles toes?
Well, it wouldn't be Achilles, would it? Because it'd be Jones' toes. Maybe that's like a new jogger's nipple or something. I don't know what the deal with that is. The thing is, right, I mean, it's Jon Jones. So if he says, well, you're not going to let me tape my toes, I won't fight in your state, the UFC will just put the event somewhere else, right? If they won't let him tape his toes in California, he'll fight in Vegas. If they won't let him tape them there, he'll fight in Florida. There's always a state that will change the rules and open the doors to get Jon Jones in one of their arenas. I don't know what the tape thing was about, but if you remember, what fight was it? Who was it? OSP that he dislocated his toe? Oh no, it was Shogun.
Chael.
Chael, there we go. Yeah, and afterwards he was like he was looking quite nauseous as Joe Rogan was trying to interview him. Yeah. Maybe he just feels like one of his toes has got a vulnerability that it's gonna snap, and he wants to tape it to the other ones. it's an odd thing, but he'll get his way because he's Jon Jones. So I don't know if it's going to slow him down that much.
Did the outlaw Dan Hardy have any little bugaboos like that where if you know, if you don't let me have the hair gel in the mohawk, I'm not fighting in your state?
No, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I used to put liquid bandage on the underside of my toes because they used to split in training camp all the time. But I would imagine that's a problem that most fighters have on mats all the time in bare feet. Yeah, I used to have to glue the bottoms of my feet together to hold them in place. But aside from that, oh, and hairspray when I was doing taekwondo, but not for my hair, for my feet. We used to put hairspray on our feet so we would grip the floor better. There's a little trade secret for you.
Somebody get Dan Hardy a hairspray sponsorship, not for the head, but for the feet.